Mossi call it brotherhood from the ashes. The Fulani whisper of the return of forgotten souls. But the world? It has no name for it, because it never believed it could exist. We call it Traore's city. 30 years ago, in Kaya, Dori, and Barcelago, thousands were forced to flee their Tontinga ancestral villages with no papers, no voice, and no roof to sleep under. To the world, they were just Boko Ianga, nameless shadows. And yet, today, in that same forsaken land, a kibare kibare, a thunderous revelation echoes. Burkina Faso, without accepting a single franc in aid, has built an entire city. But here's the paradox. How can people with nothing build everything? How can those who once lived in tents now raise homes for generations to come? Do you believe it? A city rising on its own from the hands of those once declared dead? History is being written. Your comment could be the next line. In Barcelago, they whisper stories of children born and raised under tarpaulin tents. Children who have never seen a tiled roof, never touched a wall made of sun-dried bricks, never held a birth certificate, never been called by their real names, only one, the displaced. 2 million souls Naton Nibiga children exiled from the motherland, wandering shadows in the dust, unseen, unnamed, and uncounted. The world meets in air-conditioned halls. Aid gets frozen. Cameras look the other way. And then Traoré said, "No one is disposable. If the world will not see them, then I will build a city so they can never again be forgotten." But here lies the paradox. Can a poor nation barely scraping together bags of rice really dare to spend hundreds of billions to build homes for people with no documents? While the world debates budgets, is there only one man bold enough to believe in the impossible? Is Traoré a madman, or the last sane voice in a world that has grown numb to suffering? Drop your thoughts below, because sometimes history is decided not by grand speeches, but by a single nod or a glance that turns away. The city from the motherland, a ground breaking without foreign money. There was no grand opening ceremony, no international guests, no ribbon cutting, no golden scissors, only a single wooden shovel, a cloud of red dust rising from Kaya's soil, and the calloused hands of those once erased from the map. Traoré stood at the center of a circle formed by the nameless. He did not give a speech. He simply said one sentence in Moray, "Zanni Yamba Zanga." If no one gives it to us, we will make it ourselves. And with that, Traoré's city officially began. No sponsors, no United Nations project, not a single euro from the EU or a cent from US aid. Every element from the architecture to the raw materials was Burkinabe. The government quietly recruited young local architects, engineers who were once dismissed for lacking international credentials were called back. The first blueprints were not made on computers, but drawn by hand on recycled sheets, annotated entirely in the national language. Each brick was forged from the soil of the homeland. Each roof tile molded from the ash of burned villages. No one outside the country even knew the project existed. The government sealed all information. No press, no live streams, no foreign consultants invited for feedback. Because they knew, if the world found out this dream would be aborted before it took its first breath, Traoré made a decision. This city would be built like a military operation, silent, focused, classified. The team in charge? The same military engineering unit once tasked with defending the nation's borders. But this time, their mission was different. Bullets were replaced with bricks. Convoys carried stone, not ammunition. Bulldozers moved dust, not barricades. Simultaneously, local community leaders were instructed to identify who would receive homes. No ID required. just a verbal confirmation from village chiefs and griots, traditional storytellers. Priority was given to widows, the disabled, war veterans, and orphan-led households. The selection criteria were not bureaucratic. They were based on collective memory. A 72-year-old woman named Nene, whose home was burned by mercenaries, was the first to sign her name for a plot of land. She drew her map by hand, no GPS coordinates, only a description, 7 steps from where I was born, beneath my ancestors' baobab tree. A young engineer translated that drawing into real plans, and her house was built exactly there. There is no architecture more modern than loyalty to memory. Each neighborhood was centered around a community core. A school, a health clinic, a market, a water station, a nursery, and a playground, all within a 10-minute walk. Streetlights ran on solar energy. Gray water was recycled through underground irrigation, turning every housing unit into a food garden. Children were given not just beds, but books, sunlight, and the sound of drums at sunrise. A 29-year-old engineer named Issouf, who once worked as a doorman for a European firm, said, "In Europe, I guarded someone else's door. Here, I'm building a city for my people." Workers were paid a fair wage. They ate 3 meals a day. They slept on solid wooden beds. No one was yelled at. No surveillance cameras. Only the rhythm of the djembe drum each morning, summoning them to the work site like a sacred ritual. When international observers finally caught wind and asked, "Who is funding this project?" Burkina Faso replied, "The sweat of our people, the wisdom of our ancestors." France became suspicious. The EU issued warnings. The IMF threatened to downgrade the country's credit rating. Traoré did not respond. Instead, he sent a troupe of folk performers to sing outside foreign embassies. Their play was titled, "The Village That Owes No One." Meanwhile, the city continued to rise. As Zone 3's foundation was completed, thousands of people from Barcelona, Kongoussi, and Tugan flocked to the site, but not to watch. To volunteer their labor. They said, "I once had no homeland. If this is the city of the displaced, then let me lay one brick for myself." This was no longer just construction. It became a movement to restore dignity. They were no longer called homeless. They had a new name, the keepers of the land, and for the first time in their lives, they felt seen. They felt real. They felt remembered. If you were a citizen of Burkina Faso, would you leave to beg for aid in a faraway land? Or stay and build a city with your own hands? Leave a comment, because that may be the message the world needs to hear. Would you choose to live in a home you helped build? Or wait for help from a place you've never seen? If you had lost your house, your name, your homeland, but today you are called a keeper of the land, would you forgive the world, or begin to rewrite history in your own voice? The world panics over a city built without aid. When the first photos of Traoré's city leaked, people thought it was CGI, a simulation, a beautiful illusion. Surely, a poor country just emerging from civil war could not possibly build an urban zone like this, and certainly not without a single coin of foreign aid. Western media shifted from silence to suspicion. Headline after headline began to surface. The mysterious city in Burkina Faso. Who is really behind it? Is Traoré building a hidden military training camp? In Brussels, a closed-door emergency meeting was held between aid organizations and EU officials. An 86-page classified report circulated with a chilling conclusion. If this model spreads, it poses a serious threat to Western influence and power structures in Africa. The IMF sent a formal letter demanding Burkina Faso disclose the project's funding sources. The World Bank requested a fiscal risk assessment. USAID issued a public warning. Without international oversight, this project could lead to human rights violations. read for LibriVox.o. Burkina Faso said, "Nothing." At a press conference in Ouagadougou, Traoré stepped to the podium. He held up the blueprint of one of the houses being distributed to displaced citizens. He raised it in front of hundreds of journalists and said, "If this is a human rights violation, then let me violate again and again until every citizen has a roof." The room went silent, then exploded. The world was stunned. Behind the scenes, Western NGOs compiled lists of local material suppliers and began covert pressure campaigns to cut off the supply chain. Several international companies terminated contracts with Burkina Faso's brick manufacturers, citing failure to meet global compliance standards. Then came the big guns. International financial institutions threatened to revoke credit access, downgrade national ratings, and label Burkina Faso a high-risk investment zone. But Traoré had anticipated this. He formed a national coalition of small and medium enterprises called the Union of Those Who Don't Sign NIF Papers. They produced their own materials, used local transportation, and created a self-reliant supply chain with zero foreign dependency. Each business signed a pledge: no foreign loans, no contracts with companies tied to Western aid, no profit above dignity. Soon, a movement began sweeping across the Sahel. In Mali, hundreds of architecture students sent letters volunteering for the project. In Niger, young engineers offered groundwater filtration technology. In Togo, a reforestation team planted trees around the city. No salary, no fame, just one sentence: "We too were once forgotten." Meanwhile, in Washington, a special advisory board convened to evaluate the soft power threat posed by Traoré's city. A senior analyst testified, "This is not just about housing. This is a declaration of independence from the aid system. If it works, Africa will stop borrowing from us." At the same time, Western ambassadors across Africa quietly warned, if Traoré doesn't soften his stance, aid will be cut off completely. Burkina Faso's reply? A short communiqué issued in Moré, Fulani, Dioula, and English: "If the price of aid is obedience, then we choose independence." That defiance did not weaken Traoré. It strengthened him, turning him into a symbol of a rising ideology: urban sovereignty. The phrase Traoré urbanism began appearing in academic forums in Dakar, Kigali, and Addis Ababa. No longer were urban dreams chained to Western models. This was architecture from memory, community-centered design, and universal ownership. Alarmed, a group of scholars from France, the UK, and Germany published a risk report. It warned, this self-reliant urban model will erode transparency across African states as they no longer report to international financial bodies. The response? Burkina Faso's Ministry of Communication posted on its official website, "Transparency means citizens knowing who lives in the house next door, not foreign officials knowing what we spend our money on." The global press fumed. Financial Times accused Traoré of promoting a new African populism. The Guardian wrote, "One city might be enough to start a war, and yet inside Burkina Faso, the opposite of war was happening." Hundreds of thousands of people poured into the new urban zones not for a parade, but to witness life being rebuilt. One elderly man collapsed in tears at the doorstep of his new home. "I thought I'd die in a tent, but now I can leave this world with a roof above me and my name on the door." A 9-year-old boy stood before his new classroom and asked his teacher, "Miss, is this really my house? No one's going to make me leave anymore, right?" And that is why the world is afraid. Not because Burkina Faso built homes, but because it dismantled an entire dependency system using concrete and hope. What do you think when an entire continent is placed under a microscope yet dares, for the first time, to build a future that does not need to be approved. If you believe that development doesn't need permission, leave a comment below. Why is lack of international oversight dangerous if it means the poor finally have shelter and schools? What if a human rights violation meant giving the poor a dignified place to live? Would you still call it a crime? Would you call it a revolution? The invisible attack and a nation awakening. When the first homes in Traoré city lit up with electricity, clean water flowed, and the sound of children's laughter echoed through the streets, the world said nothing. No congratulations from the United Nations. No recognition from the World Bank or IMF. Not a single Western news outlet reported positively. Instead, came the tightening grip of silence. The international SWIFT system began obstructing financial transactions linked to construction materials from Burkina Faso. Some logistics firms were sanctioned, barred from transporting goods from Kaya to neighboring nations. A shipment of eco-bricks headed for Togo was abruptly returned. The reason? Fails to meet sustainable development standards under the international aid framework. Simultaneously, NGOs that had long operated in the Kaya region were instructed to evacuate their foreign staff, citing security concerns. Western media slowly began to release a new wave of articles, this time framed as questions. Who's really behind this model? Is a non-African power secretly funding this? Traoré revisionary reformer or disruptor of global order? A foreign journalist tried to film on-site, but it was not the government who stopped him. It was the people. An elderly woman raised her cane to the camera and said, "You only came when we were starving. Now that we're full, you see us as dangerous?" In Brussels, an emergency meeting convened between aid agencies and nations with financial stakes in the Sahel. One member of parliament warned, "That city is becoming a symbol. If we do not act, we will lose the entire region." Weeks later, the internet signal across Traoré city went dark. State television could no longer broadcast its documentary about the housing project. Social media posts featuring the city were flagged as misinformation. Some videos were deleted citing community guideline violations. Burkina Faso filed a formal complaint. No response. Traoré summoned his technology team. He gave a single command: "We will build our own network." 3 months later, an independent internet infrastructure went live, powered by local satellites and optical transmission lines developed by students at the University of Ouagadougou. Traoré declared, "If our voices are not welcome in their world, then we will create our own." Meanwhile, in New York, an international summit on sustainable urban development convened. Not a single mention of Traoré city. Instead, an aid-funded resettlement model in Haiti won the prize. A model where residents still live in tents awaiting the next World Bank disbursement. At a press conference in Paris, the French president was asked about Traoré city. He shrugged. "That is not a city. It's a political statement disguised as urban planning." Hours later, the Burkinabe diaspora in Marseille marched in the streets, carrying signs that read, "If it is politics, at least it gave us a home." Across Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, the #number Build Like Traoré began to spread. Architecture students redrew city plans and released them online for free. In Ethiopia, engineers developed open-source mapping tools to replicate the model of memory-based cities. In South Africa, urban sovereignty conferences were held for the first time without foreign sponsorship. And what confused the West the most was this: Traoré did not launch a media campaign. No talk shows. No loud declarations. Instead, he simply stood behind the workers, sometimes carrying bricks, or sat quietly in school courtyards, listening to children recite poetry in Moray. The city did not need his words, because it had become the message, and that made it uncontrollable. When a global financial entity offered emergency investment to scale up the model, Burkina Faso declined. When a humanitarian fund pledged $200 million to optimize the supply chain, they declined again. Traoré answered, "If independence cannot be bought with blood, then let it not be sold for money." At that moment, invisible attacks escalated. An explosion at a cement warehouse in the city, a sabotage incident at the central solar power grid, a cyber attack on the National Citizen Database. All in the same week. No one claimed responsibility. No arrests were made. But the people understood. The war had begun. That night, at a community gathering under a darkened sky, Traoré took the stage. "If they destroy one brick, we will lay 10 more. If they cut the power, we will light fires with our hands. If they silence our networks, our mouths will speak, until the whole world has no choice but to listen." And they believed him. Thousands lifted their old phones into the air. The flashlights flickered on. A sea of stars in the darkness. The city glowed, with a light that no enemy could shut off. Whose side would you choose? The side of those who build in silence, or those who shine light to maintain control? Leave your comment below so history knows. You witnessed this moment. Why is a city that provides homes, electricity, water, and schools labeled a threat? So what truly terrifies the world, justice or independence? If you were once called invisible, but today you are building a city with your own hands, is it that the world does not see you? Or that they've chosen not to? The truth hidden in a dusty drawer. No one expected this. While global media tirelessly declared that Traoré City was nothing more than a fantasy, in a small office inside the United Nations headquarters, an old drawer was quietly pulled open. Inside it lay a forgotten 12-page document. Its title, Rapid Urban Model Proposal for the Sahel Region, 2017. Auteur, Ibrahim Traoré. At the time, he was just a mid-level logistics officer. Unknown. Never seen on television. Never quoted in any publication. That proposal had once been sent to major international bodies. UN Habitat, World Bank, African Union Development Agency. Its contents? Exactly what Traoré is building today. Sustainable housing for displaced communities without foreign aid. Construction using local materials. Integration of education, healthcare, and food systems into urban design. Community-led management, not donor-controlled governance. And on the very last page, a single line typed in English, "Do not give us money, give us room to build." The verdict? Rejected. Reason? Not feasible, lacks funding, no qualified implementation partners. No one replied. No follow-up, not even a footnote in policy discussion. The PDF was quietly buried in a document folder labeled, "Not Approved." And Sohey remained silent. But he did not give up. Nearly a decade later, that same proposal has not only been realized, it has surpassed every target, fulfilled every principle, and inspired a movement beyond its original scope. Not because the world gave him permission, but because the world denied him one. The day that drawer was opened was the moment the international community realized Traoré City was never an act of rebellion. It was Plan B. Their Plan B, that they abandoned. In a closed-door session, a senior UN official was overheard saying, "We could have walked beside him, but no, he has walked far ahead of us." What would you do if the entire world turned you away? Would you surrender? Or quietly turn the scar they left you into your roadmap? Leave a comment, because sometimes one word from you might stop someone else from giving up. When the world said you lack credentials, lack funds, lack feasibility, would you accept that? Or would you prove that it was they who lacked vision? Traoré once said, "Do not give us money, Give us room to build. If it were, would you have the courage to say that, too, in front of the world? One city, one philosophy, one continent awakening. Burkina Faso does not have a space station, no aircraft carriers, no veto power at the United Nations Security Council, but on the day that children once raised under tarpaulin tents were handed keys to their own homes, the world began to tremble, not because Traoré built a city, but because he did not need them to do it. No loans, no aid packages, no emergency support plans, only belief, sweat, and a quiet vow. If no one will come to help my people, then I will be the first. In less than a year, Traoré City delivered over 20,000 permanent homes. Note shelters, not rental units, but homes with legal ownership. Those once labeled as burdens were now legal stewards of the land they had been born from. In its schools, there were no imported curricula. Instead, books were written from memory, where children learned not only about math and science, but about their homelands, lineages, and the pain of once being forgotten. There, no one asked, "What was your test score?" They asked, "What will you do to make your village better?" Clinics ran 24/7 on solar power. Clean water was not a privilege, it was a right. Food markets did not fluctuate by global pricing indexes. They were coordinated by local civil councils. And above all, for the first time, a city could be named in the mother tongue, not after a foreign sponsor. An African Union delegation came to visit. They were not greeted by limousines or state banquets, but with roasted fish, okra leaves, and children singing in Fulani. At the end of their trip, they wrote, "This is not just a city. This is a political declaration built with bricks and smiles. For the first time, Africa is living with dignity without asking for permission. In Mali, a town is being planned under the Traoré model. In Niger, young architects are calling their project Bricks Against Slavery. In South Africa, a new movement spreads. Land is a right, not a gift." And back in Burkina Faso, the very people who once walked behind aid trucks are now using their own savings to build their first schools. They do not ask for awards. They just hang a handwritten sign. "We were once forgotten, not anymore." And now you ask, can one small city truly change an entire continent? Can a single brick placed in the right spot bring down an entire system of dependency? The answer lives in every roof laid by village hands. It shines in the eyes of a child finally called by their real name. It echoes in the silence of those who once ruled through money, but now cannot buy even a single heartbeat of this people's will. We used to believe, to be sovereign, you had to be rich, powerful, global. But maybe sovereignty begins with something smaller, something deeper. It begins with the word number. Noto bowing heads. Noto borrowed prestige. Noto living a temporary life on your permanent land. And you reading these words right now, if you are African, are you ready to lay the first brick for the city of your people? If you are not from this continent, will you dare to ask yourself, what is development and who gets to define it? Leave a comment below, because every word you speak today could be the first brick of a tomorrow that needs no permission. If this story touched you, click like, subscribe, and share. For an Africa that will no longer sleep. For a future not written by someone else. For a city small as it may be that made the whole world stop and look. If a child who once had no name can now be called in their own language, then who, really, has lost power? If one small city can provide homes, clean water, and schools without needing permission, then what excuse do wealthy cities have for not doing the same? Ask ChatGPT.